Everyone thinks they know the double-barrel shotgun, the sheriff's scattergun, the outlaw's sawn-off, the weapon that supposedly ruled every saloon and stagecoach. One blast to clear a room, two barrels of unstoppable power, and outlaws cutting them short to hide under a coat. But the truth? Almost everything you've heard about the shotgun is wrong. Hollywood exaggerated it. Folklore made it fearsome, and for over a century, the myths piled up higher than the muzzle flash. Was it really the ultimate close-range killer? Did every cowboy keep one under the bar? And could it really spread shot wide enough to hit everything in sight without even aiming? We're counting down the 13 biggest myths about the double-barrel shotgun, ranked from small misconceptions to the ultimate frontier falsehood. And make sure you stick around for myth number 1, because it's the single biggest lie of them all, the one that completely rewrote how people imagine the Wild West. Once you hear the truth, you'll never look at the double barrel or the frontier gunfight the same way again. So let's kick it off with one of the most dramatic claims of all, the idea that a shotgun blast could throw a man clear off his feet. Number 13, the knockback myth. If you've watched any Western showdown, you've probably seen this one. A shotgun fires, the bad guy gets launched through a saloon window, and the crowd gasps at the sheer force. It looks devastating, as if the shotgun blast carries enough power to knock a man clean off his feet and send him flying. But the truth? That knockback is pure Hollywood. Physics doesn't work that way. If a shotgun blast really had the force to throw a man backwards 10 feet, the recoil would throw the shooter just as far in the opposite direction. In reality, the recoil from a 12-gauge double barrel is sharp but manageable. A jolt to the shoulder, not a catapult. The pellets do their damage by penetration, not by shoving bodies around like rag dolls. So why did this myth take root? Stage performers and later film directors loved the visual. A man staggering backward or crashing through a chair sold the drama. Over time, audiences expected the shotgun to act like a medieval cannon instead of what it really was. A devastating close-range firearm with a brutal spread, but not a human launcher. Frontier lawmen and outlaws feared the shotgun for its stopping power, not for theatrics. A hit at 10 yards could end a fight instantly, but it wouldn't send the target flying into the street. So while Hollywood loved the shotgun for its cinematic punch, the reality was deadlier in a different way. No man needed to fly across a room for a double barrel to decide a gunfight. And if you think the knockback myth is wild, wait until you hear the next one, a claim that stuck around for over a century about how every outlaw supposedly carried a sawn-off under his coat. Because coming in at number 12 is the truth about the outlaw's weapon of choice. Number 12. Every outlaw carried a sawn-off. If you picture an outlaw in the Wild West, chances are you see it. A short, stubby shotgun pulled from under a coat, barrels hacked down for a quick and dirty ambush. Movies and pulp novels turned the sawn-off into the outlaw's signature weapon. Dangerous, forbidden, and in every gang's saddlebag. But the truth? Sawn-offs were far less common than the legends suggest. Yes, cutting a shotgun's barrels made it easier to conceal and maneuver in tight spaces like stagecoaches or saloons. And yes, some criminals did use them for intimidation. But most double-barrel shotguns in the frontier weren't sawn off at all. They were standard hunting length, designed for birds, deer, and defense, not for stuffing under a duster coat. The reality was simple. A sawn-off cost you accuracy, range, and velocity. At close quarters, it still packed a punch, but beyond a few yards, it lost much of its effectiveness. Outlaws who wanted a dependable weapon often stuck with revolvers or rifles they could trust in a fight. So why did the myth stick? Because dime novelists and later filmmakers loved the look. A sawn-off shotgun was visual shorthand for bad man, a weapon that looked mean and fit the lawless image. Over time, audiences assumed it was everywhere, when in fact it was a fringe tool, not a standard sidearm. Frontier lawmen, stagecoach guards, and ranchers relied far more on full-length double barrels than flashy cut-down versions. Outlaws with sawn-offs existed, But they were the exception, not the rule. So while the sawn-off shotgun earned its reputation in stories and cinema, it was hardly the everyday weapon of choice for every desperado in the West. And if you think that's eye-opening, wait until you hear myth number 11, because next we're busting the belief that every shotgun was exactly the same size, when in reality the frontier was loaded with gauges you've probably never even heard of. Number 11. All shotguns were 12 gauge. Ask most people to picture a Wild West shotgun and they'll tell you the same thing. It was a big 12 gauge every time. Movies, games, and pop culture paint the frontier scattergun as if it came in one flavor, a single standard gauge that everyone carried. But the truth? The West was packed with variety. Yes, the 12 gauge became the dominant size in the 20th century, but on the frontier you could find 10, 16, and even 20 gauge double barrels. Farmers, ranchers, and hunters often chose smaller bores for game or larger ones for sheer power. That diversity wasn't just preference, it reflected the realities of frontier supply. A cowboy or settler often bought whatever ammunition was available locally, and gunmakers built shotguns in multiple gauges to meet those needs. The 10 gauge in particular was a favorite for stagecoach guards and express companies, prized for its heavier load at close quarters. Meanwhile, lighter 16 and 20 gauge doubles served hunters who wanted less recoil and more portability. So why does the all 12 gauge myth exist? Because as time went on, the 12 gauge became the most commercially standardized. Hollywood, looking backward, simplified the story, showing only 12 gauge scatterguns because that's what modern audiences recognized. But on the actual frontier, the double-barrel shotgun wasn't one uniform tool. It was a whole family of gauges, each chosen for a specific purpose. So while the myth of the universal 12 gauge makes the West sound tidy, the truth is much messier and a lot more interesting. And if you thought variety in gauge was surprising, wait until you hear myth number 10, the claim that every cowboy had a shotgun at his side as if they were just as common as a revolver. Number 10, every cowboy carried a shotgun. One of the most common images of the frontier is the cowboy with a shotgun always at the ready, whether across his saddle, leaning behind the bar, or hanging from the stagecoach seat. Hollywood made it look universal. Every cowboy, outlaw, and ranch hand armed with a double-barrel scattergun. But that's not how it really looked on the frontier. Yes, the shotgun was respected as a devastating close-range weapon, and stagecoach companies often armed guards with them. But for the average working cowboy, they weren't nearly as common as the myths suggest. The truth is, most cowboys were poorly paid ranch hands earning $30 a month at best. A reliable double-barrel shotgun was a significant expense, and unlike a revolver, it wasn't as practical for daily carry on the trail. Shotguns were heavy, bulkier to transport, and far better suited for fixed defense, protecting a homestead, guarding a coach, or defending a town. Surviving letters and diaries from the period make it clear many ranch crews had only 1 or 2 shotguns between them, if any. Revolvers and rifles dominated day-to-day use, while the shotgun filled more specialized roles. So why do we picture every cowboy with a double barrel? Because Hollywood and dime novels needed a visual shorthand. Nothing looked more dramatic on screen than a lawman racking open a coach gun or an outlaw blasting through a saloon door. The shotgun became a cinematic symbol, not an everyday tool. In reality, the scattergun was present on the frontier, but it was far from universal. Most cowboys were far more likely to carry a revolver, or whatever old rifle the ranch already owned, than their own personal double barrel. So while the shotgun became a symbol of raw frontier power, it wasn't actually riding with every cowboy across the plains. And speaking of myths about availability, that brings us to number 9, the belief that these shotguns were cheap and easy for anyone to afford. Number 9, shotguns were cheap and everyone owned one. The classic frontier image shows a cowboy walking into a general store, tossing a few coins on the counter, and riding out with a shiny new double barrel under his arm. Movies made it look effortless, as if every homestead, ranch, and saloon had a shotgun leaning by the door. But in reality, owning a double barrel was a serious investment. When quality European or American-made doubles were sold on the frontier, they could run anywhere from $25 to $50, a hefty price at a time when the average cowboy made just $30 a month. For many working hands, that meant a shotgun cost nearly 2 months' wages before you even bought the black powder and shot to keep it fed. That expense kept the shotgun from being as universal as the myths suggest. Many settlers and ranchers relied on older single shots, surplus military muskets, or whatever battered firearm they could afford. Some families saved up for years to buy a good double barrel, while others made do with hand-me-downs or cheap imports of uneven quality. So why does the "everyone had one" myth stick? Because later advertising and pulp stories turned the shotgun into a symbol of rugged home defense. Mail-order catalogs at the turn of the century pushed cheap shotguns as the gun every man should own, and Hollywood doubled down, giving every cowboy and outlaw a gleaming scattergun as if they were standard issue. But the truth is, the double barrel was admired, not assumed. It was a premium tool, a lifetime purchase for some, and out of reach for many others. So while the shotgun became an icon of frontier firepower, it wasn't hanging in every cabin or resting in every saddle. If you're learning something new, drop a quick like. It really helps the channel reach more history buffs. And that brings us to myth number 8, the belief that the double barrel was the most powerful firearm of the West, able to outgun anything else on the frontier. Number 8, the shotgun was the most powerful frontier weapon. Ask anyone who's seen a Western and they'll tell you the same thing. Nothing hit harder than a shotgun. 2 barrels of buckshot, 1 trigger pull, and the fight was over. Hollywood made it look like the ultimate powerhouse, stronger than any revolver, rifle, or carbine in the West. But the truth? Power depended on range, load, and use. And the shotgun wasn't always the top dog. At close quarters, a double barrel loaded with buckshot was devastating, no question. A hit within 20 yards could stop a man cold. But beyond that distance, rifles easily outclassed it in penetration, velocity, and accuracy. Shotguns were designed for versatility. They could fire birdshot for hunting, buckshot for defense, or even slugs in some cases. But none of those loads made it an unbeatable frontier superweapon. Against distant targets or against hardened cover, rifles like the Sharps or Spencer had far greater reach and stopping power. So why does the myth stick? Because on screen, the shotgun looked brutal. Muzzle flash, smoke, and the idea of spraying enemies fit perfectly into cinematic shorthand. In dime novels, a scattergun blast could clear a saloon with 1 shot. It made for good drama, even if it wasn't physics. In reality, the shotgun was valued for what it was, a flexible, close-range tool that doubled as a hunting gun and a defensive weapon. It was never the undisputed king of power, just the right tool for specific jobs. So while the double barrel earned its place in frontier lore, it wasn't the apex predator of frontier firepower. And speaking of myths about battlefield dominance, that brings us to myth number 7. The belief that the shotgun was the universal weapon of lawmen and stagecoach guards, as if every express rider carried one at all times. Number 7, the shotgun was the standard weapon of lawmen and stagecoach guards. If you go by Hollywood's version of the West, every sheriff had a double-barrel shotgun propped behind his desk, and every stagecoach guard rode with one across his lap. Movies show shotguns as the default badge of authority, the iron that kept order in the streets and protected every coach from bandit. But that version of events owes more to screenwriters than to reality. Yes, some lawmen and express companies did arm themselves with double barrels. Wells Fargo guards in particular used them, often shortened into coach guns for maneuverability. But they weren't universal, and they weren't the everyday weapon of choice for every sheriff or deputy. Most frontier lawmen relied on revolvers first, since they were lighter, easier to carry, and quicker to draw in a sudden fight. Rifles also saw regular use, especially for range and accuracy. The shotgun was reserved for specific scenarios, defending a doorway, riding shotgun on a coach, or holding a close quarters position. So why does the myth persist? because the image was simple and dramatic. A lawman holding a scattergun looked instantly authoritative. Stagecoach companies themselves leaned into the image too. Riding shotgun became the phrase for the guard's seat, cementing the association in language long after the practice itself had faded. In truth, the shotgun was one tool in the frontier arsenal, not the universal symbol of law enforcement. It was effective when used, but it didn't ride with every sheriff, and not every stagecoach guard carried one. So while the double barrel earned its legend in certain roles, it was never the standard weapon of authority the movies suggest. And speaking of exaggerated power, that takes us to myth number 6, the idea that the shotgun could hit everything in sight with one blast as if aiming didn't matter. Number 6, you don't need to aim. The spray and pray myth. If you've watched a dozen westerns, you've seen the same trick. A scattergun blasts open a saloon door, the hero squeezes the trigger, and every bad guy in the room folds like dominoes. No aiming required. On screen, the shotgun looks like a magic paintbrush. Point it vaguely in the enemy's direction, and the pellets do the rest. But that's not how shotguns work in real life. Shot patterns are real and measurable. Yes, they spread, but not wildly enough to make aiming irrelevant. At typical fight distances, the pattern is still compact. Most of the pellets stay inside a circle only a few feet across, and outside of very close range that spread quickly reduces effectiveness. Aiming at the center of mass, angling the bead, and knowing how your chosen load groups are all critical. Load matters too. Birdshot scatters fast and is useless for stopping a human beyond a few yards. Buckshot holds together better, but it still demands an aimed shot to place multiple projectiles on target. Slugs change the equation. They act like a single heavy bullet and require precision just like a rifle. The idea that you can just spray smoke and expect reliable kills is a myth born of spectacle, not ballistics. There's also the matter of choke, barrel length, and range. Choke controls how tight that pattern stays. Different chokes and barrel lengths were used for specific jobs. A coach gun with an open choke at 5 yards hits very differently to a long hunting barrel at 20. Experienced frontier shooters knew this. They trained to point, to control the bead, and to choose the right load for the job. So while a shotgun can cover more area than a single rifle bullet, it doesn't absolve you from aiming. In the real West, a scattergun increased your odds in close fights. It didn't turn shooters into marksman-free spraying machines. If that surprised you, stick around. Coming up at number 5, we'll dismantle another favorite, the idea that a longer barrel somehow makes a shotgun more powerful. Number 5, a shotgun could clear a street from half a mile away. If you've seen enough westerns, you know the scene. An outlaw raises his shotgun, fires across town, and the target drops instantly, even though they're barely visible on the horizon. It's one of the most enduring exaggerations, the belief that a double barrel had the raw power and range to kill from half a mile away. The truth is, the shotgun was never designed for that kind of distance. Loaded with buckshot, its effective killing range was measured in tens of yards, not hundreds. Even a heavy 10-gauge loaded with buck or ball was lethal up close, but scattered or lost energy rapidly as the range opened. Beyond about 50 yards, patterns spread so wide and velocity dropped so sharply that a hit became unreliable. Could a shotgun fire a single large projectile, like a slug? Yes, but even then, black powder slugs carried far less velocity and accuracy than long-range rifles like the Sharps or Remington Rolling Block. Those were the true half-mile killers of the frontier, chosen by buffalo hunters and snipers who needed to reach distant targets. So why does the long-range shotgun myth stick? Because stories and later Hollywood films loved the drama. In print and on screen, a scattergun blast looked and sounded like thunder. It was easy to imagine that force carrying across entire prairies. Over time, the exaggeration became gospel. In reality, the double barrel was feared at close quarters, not celebrated for distance. Within a few steps, it could decide a fight instantly. But across a street, much less across a prairie, it wasn't the miracle weapon dime novels made it out to be. So while the shotgun earned its reputation as the frontier's blunt hammer, it was never a half-mile rifle. That power belonged to the true long-range guns of the era. And speaking of myths born from cinematic flair, that brings us to myth number 4. The belief that a shotgun could be reloaded as fast as it fired, a trick that only exists in Hollywood gunfights. Number 4, shotguns could reload instantly, Hollywood style. If you've ever watched a Western saloon fight, you've seen it. The hero fires both barrels of his shotgun, snaps it open, and somehow reloads in a blur before the smoke even cleared. 2 fresh shells slide in, the barrels snap shut, and he's instantly back in the fight, like nothing happened. It looks smooth, fast, and effortless. But the truth? Reloading a shotgun in the frontier wasn't nearly so instant. Yes, the break-action design of a double barrel made it simpler than loading a muzzle loader. You cracked it open, popped in 2 cartridges, and you were ready again. But ready again took time, and in a fight, those seconds mattered. Spent shells didn't always drop neatly out. Black powder fouling and tight chambers often meant you had to pry them free before reloading, costing precious moments. And once empty, a shotgun gave you only 2 shots, far fewer than a Winchester or revolver. Experienced guards and cowboys carried the weapon, knowing it was a hammer blow tool, not a continuous fire machine. So why does the myth of instant reload stick? Because Hollywood loved the rhythm. A fast cut, a quick snap of the barrels, and audiences assumed it was as quick as racking a lever or cocking a revolver. The reload itself often got edited out, leaving the illusion of endless thunder. In reality, frontier shooters treated the shotgun as a fight ender. You made those first 2 blasts count, then either switched to a sidearm or ducked for cover to reload. No outlaw or lawman expected a double barrel to keep up with rifles or revolvers in sustained fire. So while the double barrel was devastating when it spoke, it wasn't the endlessly cycling cannon that movies made it out to be. And that takes us neatly into myth number 3, the belief that every shotgun was built the same, when in fact the frontier scattergun came in more variations than Hollywood ever showed. Number 3, every shotgun was the same. In movies, every shotgun looks identical, a short-barreled double, side by side, firing the exact same shells with the exact same blast every time. It's become the frontier shorthand, the coach gun that defined the Wild West. But just like most things about frontier weapons, that's a simplification Hollywood loved far more than history ever did. In reality, the double-barrel shotgun came in endless variations. Barrels could be long or short, choked tight for hunting, or wide open for close defense. Some were ornate imports from Europe, others were rugged American-made farm guns. Gauges ranged from heavy 10 bores to lighter 16s and 20s. A few were even over-under instead of side-by-side, though those were rare on the frontier. Each variation served a purpose. Coach guards often preferred shorter barrels for maneuverability. Farmers chose longer barrels for hunting birds or deer. Wealthier settlers sometimes bought finely engraved doubles, while ranch hands might scrape together money for a plain utilitarian model. So where does the one-size-fits-all myth come from? Success and simplicity. The short coach gun became so iconic in stagecoach lore and Hollywood imagery that it eclipsed the wider reality. By the time filmmakers got involved, it was easier to show one recognizable cowboy shotgun than educate audiences on gauges, chokes, and barrel lengths. In truth, the shotgun family was diverse, a whole spectrum of designs tailored to different needs. The frontier wasn't a one-gun world, even if movies made it look that way. And that brings us to myth number 2, a misconception Hollywood never let go of, the belief that the shotgun screen image actually matches how it was used in the real West. Number 2, Hollywood got it right. If you've seen even a single Western movie, you already know this shotgun. The lawman levels a stubby coach gun, blasts through a saloon, and the outlaws go flying. 2 barrels of thunder that decide the fight in an instant. Hollywood didn't just feature the double barrel, it defined it. For generations, audiences believed what the screen showed, that every sheriff kept one behind his desk, every stagecoach guard carried one across his lap, and that a single blast could knock down a room full of enemies without ever needing to reload. But the shotgun of the movies and the shotgun of the frontier were two very different weapons. Most of the shotguns you see in classic westerns weren't even the same type used on the frontier. Prop departments of the 1930s and 40s relied on later-made doubles, often with modern smokeless chambers or shortened barrels, because they were easier to handle and film. Stagecoach scenes in the 1870s routinely show guards holding shotguns that didn't exist until decades later. Movies also exaggerated everything about the scattergun, the spread, the power, the recoil, even the sound. That clean, cinematic boom audiences love? Real black powder doubles produced a much duller thud, often with choking clouds of smoke. Still, Hollywood deserves credit. They made the shotgun unforgettable. By the time the Western genre peaked, the double barrel had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol, rugged, intimidating, and simple to understand on screen. The problem is, that movie version replaced the messy truth. Instead of a practical, close-range tool, it became an unstoppable cannon that every cowboy supposedly carried. So while Hollywood turned the double barrel into a legend, it also rewrote its history frame by frame until the prop gun on screen became more real than the scattergun of the frontier. And that brings us to myth number 1, the ultimate exaggeration, the grand illusion that turned one weapon into a national myth, the belief that the shotgun was truly the most feared weapon of the Wild West. Number 1, the shotgun was the most feared weapon of the West. This is the ultimate myth, the crown jewel of the double barrel's legend, that the shotgun wasn't just part of the frontier, but that it ruled it. The image is everywhere. The sheriff standing firm with a scattergun, the outlaw blasting through a saloon door, the stagecoach guard leveling a coach gun that could supposedly decide every fight. Over time, the double barrel became remembered as the weapon of the Wild West, feared above all others. But the truth is, no single weapon ever ruled the frontier. The shotgun was effective, yes. At close range, it was devastating, and stagecoach companies trusted it for good reason. But it was just one piece of a much broader arsenal. Rifles like the Sharps and Springfields handled long-distance fights. Colt revolvers decided countless close-range encounters. And surplus muskets from the Civil War were still in circulation well into the 1880s. The shotgun was respected, but it wasn't universal. In many places, it was a home defense tool or a specialist's weapon for guarding valuable coaches. For day-to-day carry, most cowboys relied on sidearms or rifles, weapons more practical for trail life and long rides. So why does the myth of the most feared weapon stick? Because of image. A double-barrel shotgun looked intimidating. It was simple, loud, and dramatic, perfect for Hollywood, dime novels, and advertising. Over time, those stories blurred with memory until the shotgun wasn't just a weapon of the frontier, it became the weapon of the frontier. In reality, fear depended on circumstance. To an outlaw facing a stagecoach guard at 10 yards, a shotgun may have been the scariest thing in the world. But to a cowboy on the range, a revolver or a Winchester might matter far more. So while the double barrel became the cinematic king of the West, it didn't rule the frontier on its own. What it truly conquered was imagination, turning a versatile firearm into a lasting symbol of raw, unfiltered power. And there you have it, 13 of the biggest myths about the double-barrel shotgun, the scattergun that legend says was the most feared weapon of the West. From the knockback fantasy to the outlaw's sawn-off, we've seen how much of its reputation was built not by history, but by exaggeration, marketing, and Hollywood magic. The truth is, the Old West wasn't defined by a single gun. It was shaped by a patchwork of weapons, people, and stories that don't fit neatly into legend. The shotgun was iconic, yes, but it was one piece of a messy, complicated puzzle that still fascinates us today. So the next time you see a cowboy fire both barrels on screen, remember you're watching more myth than reality. And maybe that's okay, because the real history behind the scattergun is even better. Stranger, grittier, and far more human than the stories we grew up with. Which of these shotgun myths had you believed before this video? And which one surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the myths and realities of the Wild West, make sure to subscribe for more history that shoots straight and digs deep. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.